Some of the views expressed on the Mormon Channel are solely for the education and inspiration of our audience and may not represent the official position of the Church.
One of the most remarkable aspects of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is its unique history. Throughout the world, great stories from faithful church members have only added to that history. This program shares some of these incredible stories of faith, perseverance, hope, and inspiration. You're listening to Legacy. I'm your host, Nathan Wright. You're listening to the Mormon Channel of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. White, sandy beaches that invite swimming, snorkeling, and surfing, lush, dark jungles that entice the adventuring hiker and backpacker, luau's on the beach, beautiful native hula and fire dancers, and lots of succulent native food. These are just a few of the modern images of Hawaii, island paradise. Long before five-star hotels, island tours, and the Polynesian Cultural Center, Hawaii was just a place where in 1850 10 Mormon missionaries arrived to preach the restored gospel. And here to discuss the early Hawaiian mission experience is historian Chad Orton. Chad, welcome back to Legacy and the Mormon Channel.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
You've been here before, but please take a minute and reintroduce yourself to our listeners.
All right. I work in the church history department. I'm an archivist there. My current assignment is to work primarily with historic sites, where we put together information regarding the various church history sites, Nauvoo. I finished working with the Beehive House. So when individuals go there, they will have an experience that we hope is accurate and also faith-promoting. As part of my assignment in the church history department, for the last several years, I've also been editing George Q. Cannon's Hawaiian Mission Journals. It's the department's hope to publish Cannon's journals. He's one of the most influential Latter-day Saints, one few people have heard of. But I had the great opportunity to work on his Hawaiian mission. From 1850, as you said, when he arrived there with 9 other missionaries, he served until 1854. And hopefully these journals will be available in print next year.
And so that is the impetus for our discussion today. Have you talked about this previously with anyone?
I've had the great opportunity to share Cannon stories with others. This is the first time it's been widely talked about. I love talking about the experience because it is truly a unique mission, and it's an inspiring story. It's one that very few people would know about because it has not received the attention of some of the other missions in the church, such as the mission that 12 took to England. Most people are familiar with that. Most of us partly were familiar because we come from that background. I know I have ancestors who joined the church during that period of time. But this Hawaiian mission, I've talked to small groups, but not to a large audience to this extent.
So we know Christians had gone to Hawaii before 1850. What was the reason we finally ended up in Hawaii with missionaries?
That's a good question. First, we ought to, if it's all right, I'll talk a little bit about Hawaii. For a number of years, Hawaiians, they followed a native religion, that they worshipped idols. They had what was known as what we'd call a taboo system. There were things that you could do and things that you couldn't do. And if you broke these laws, you would be subject to what were called kapus, from which taboo is a very similar word, that there were punishments. These laws were not unlike what you read about in the Old Testament as far as laws, what you can't do.
Sounds very Mosaic, actually.
It's very Mosaic. And, in fact, when these missionaries get there, they're surprised to find how closely linked the Hawaiians are in theology in certain degrees with ancient Israel. And as Mormons, we have our explanation that we might talk about later, but In 1819, Kamehameha I, Kamehameha the Great, who had united the islands, he died. His son took over, Kamehameha II, and one of the first things he did was remove the kapu system. He removed the taboos. They no longer, some of these requirements, for instance, a woman to eat a banana, she would be subject to death. But some of these kapus were pushed aside at this time, and the following year, Protestant missionaries from New England arrived in the islands and began Christianizing the islands. Several years later, Catholic missionaries from France arrived. And in 1850, after nearly 30 years and the islands had become largely Christian, the Latter-day Saint missionaries came to Hawaii. The call at the time is kind of an interesting story. These missionaries, when they were called, they'd been away from home for a year. The previous year, they had been called to the goldfields of California. And as the winter was approaching, there was a concern about what they needed to do with these missionaries. If they stayed there with nothing to do, would they end up doing things that others were doing, such as gambling, drinking? So the thought initially was, let's send these missionaries to Hawaii. They can preach the gospel during the winter, and it'll keep them away from trouble, and then they can come back and start digging gold again the following year. That was kind of the impetus for this call. There were certain things that those who called these missionaries to Hawaii and those who went knew literally nothing about the islands. They assumed that they could go there and serve a very short mission because they'd go and talk in English. But when they get to Hawaii, they discovered that Hawaiians spoke, that was their language. They didn't speak English. There were a lot of shocks along the way that these missionaries had to deal with. And yet, in spite of that, it became one of the most successful missions in the 19th century.
So from your notes, they went expecting to preach to white people.
Yes. And as they discovered, white people were not, I think the exact phrase is, the white people were not as numerous as we were led to believe. And that's one of the great stories about Canon in Hawaii, is that this mission seemed to balance. I mean, balance is not the right word, but they're always going from, this is a great inspired mission, to the edge of disaster almost, like it was ill-fated. And things were not going well, and then the Lord steps in, and great things happen. One of the stories that is frequently told, or is well known, if they know something about this mission, those who know about Hawaii, is that 5 of the missionaries went home initially, thinking that their mission was only to preach to the whites. And I don't condemn them because that is their understanding. One of the missionaries who stayed was told that once they got there, they were to be led by the Spirit. And that was the feeling that these 5 had, was that they needed to stay and to work with the native Hawaiians, even though it would require more than a short term, more than a winter, and it would require them learning the language.
It might have even seemed to them that sending them there to stay out of trouble in California was an afterthought, and so if they'd spent the summer, then their time was finished. Yes,
and there was that thinking, and that's a natural thinking. I think you can understand that. And you know, one of the stories, if I might back up before they get there, is that I talked about it being ill-fated versus inspired, and the day that Charles C. Rich came to issue these calls to these missionaries, they just had a disaster happen.
This was in California.
In California, when they're up on the Middle Fork of the American River, they had worked all summer trying to create a wing dam by which they would divert the river so that they could expose the bed of the river and hopefully find gold. And the day before Charles C. Rich arrived, there was a heavy rain that came through and not only destroyed their dam, but it destroyed all the dams along the river. And by all accounts, most accounts in the newspapers, they said, well, we can't do any more this year, and so all the miners left. Well, these individuals had been called to Hawaii. They have no money. How do you get to the islands when you don't have a penny? You've spent everything you have to get to California. You haven't made a cent. And so they try again to fix their dam and to dig for gold, and they strike it rich. I mean, they hit a vein of gold that gets them enough money to get to Hawaii, and then it gives out. And at the time, one of those missionaries, Henry Bigler, said, "Oh, it's a shame. You know, our gold has given out." And later, with the hindsight of a life of experience, he later said, "Well, it's probably good. Otherwise, our eyes would become so full of gold
they wouldn't have left.
They wouldn't have left on their mission." So that's one example of here. It seemed like bad timing, and it really was. They wanted to go home to where they see the Lord's hand in their mission experience.
So there's another story of when they actually are ready to leave, another episode of the Lord's hand in actually helping his missionaries get to Hawaii.
There is one of the stories that really quite impressed me the first time I read Cannon's journal is that once they get to San Francisco and they're able to obtain a passage on a boat, and they have to get a second-class passage where they're down under between decks, like many of the immigrants traveled here to Utah would travel. There's a storm arises again at this time, and they delay their passage, and finally the storm breaks. Maybe I ought to go back and tell an experience that as Cannon is waiting for this storm to pass, he has this dream, in which in the dream these missionaries are trying to raise the anchor so that the boat can start on its journey. And these 10 missionaries are pulling at the anchor, and they can't raise it. And in this dream, as they're working there, Cannon sees the prophet Joseph, who, of course, had died a number of years beforehand, and he sees him walk past the missionaries up to the front of the boat. And Cannon follows Joseph up to the front, and Joseph kneels down and offers a prayer, and then tells George Buchanan to go back and to raise the anchor. This anchor these 10 missionaries have been working on for all this time, which they can't budge. And Cannon goes back in this dream, and he's easily now able to raise the anchor. And at the time in his journal, and I think it's kind of fascinating, if you'll permit me, he says, "When I awoke, I thought that it was given me as a warning that faith and prayer was of more effect than the windlass, which is used to raise an anchor." But later on, recounting this dream after years of experience, this is what he told a congregation of the saints. "I would like to impress this upon the minds of this congregation if they choose to take it. Great is the power of prayer when properly offered to the Lord. Whatever success I have had upon my missions, I have remembered that has been due to faith and prayer. I have remembered this always. I have endeavored to exercise faith in God through prayer, which has been heard by the Almighty. My brethren and sisters, remember this lesson. Cultivate the Spirit of God. Keep it with you. Remember always there is power in prayer greater than anything man can do. There is no power in monarchs. There is no power in armies. There is no power in legislation, nor in anybody nor anything else upon the earth that equals the power of God in prayer." I love that particular story. And it comes into effect with Cannon because as the missionaries finally get ready to leave the Golden Gate, the weather seems to have broken, and as they start out, the storms come back in. They have a pilot who's an individual who guides boats out of the harbor, becomes so concerned as the storm starts raging, because there are rocks all around and the pilot will help you steer clear of the rocks. He's so concerned that this boat is going to crash into the rocks and go down that when this boat comes going the other direction, he goes and gets on it. And he leaves so fast that they talk about it. It's almost like the story of Joseph. The captain is trying to hold him, keep him on the boat, and this guy is so anxious to get off that he leaves the boat and leaves his coat behind. He is so afraid that this boat is going to go down, and these missionaries are stuck below deck where it's dark, and the boat is just with this storm coming up, and all of a sudden in the middle of this missionaries hear this big boom that they're not quite sure what it is. And about that time, they hear the captain tell the crew, "Prepare to meet your Maker." And you know, at this time, George Buchanan and the others are down there. He, remembering this dream, is offering prayer unto the Lord. And eventually, they're able to pass out of the Golden Gate. They come to discover the next day what the noise they hear is that they have lost the rope, the tiller rope going to the helm, and so they have no way to direct this boat through these rocks. And the only way that could have happened was through the goodness of the Lord. It's a story I absolutely love.
So what do the missionaries find when they actually arrive in Hawaii?
When they arrive, so they're pulling into the harbor, there are a number of natives come out in canoes to meet the vessel. And Cannon notes that he really didn't pay much attention to them because he thought that they would be speaking to the whites. The missionaries arrive there. They get everything taken care of as far as their passports and what they need to do to land. And of the 10 individuals, Cannon is the youngest of the group, and he's the last to sign the manifest, indicating where he fits in the hierarchy of these missionaries. And the missionaries go out and they dedicate the islands, and they work out. One of the first things they discover, because they didn't know anything about the islands, is that there are 5 principal islands, and there are 10 missionaries. And wow, we will assign 2 missionaries to the islands, and
kind of worked out.
And at least initially. And then one of the missionaries, Thomas Whittle, is given permission to get employment instead. But Cannon ends up going to the island of Maui. He said, when I saw Maui, I had this feeling that I needed to go there. I didn't know why. And so when he's assigned to Maui, it's like, well, again, that's the hand of the Lord. And he goes there with an individual named James Keeler and another individual named Henry Bigler. These 3 individuals end up going to the island of Maui. And when they get there, Cannon talks about being the stranger in a strange land and sitting down, and what do you do? There are not these whites that they anticipated there. He doesn't know the language. He feels 1,000,000 miles away from anybody. But you start seeing the hand of the Lord slowly in his life at this time. They finally arrange housing to live with someone who's the house is owned by a native, and they determine that they are going to learn the language. But how they don't know. It's not unlike unlike today, one of the things is they can't find any books on how to study the language, so they're only going to have to learn it by talking to those they meet. And they go looking for books, and eventually they're able to talk to one of the Protestant missionary wives, and through our Heavenly Father's through the help of our Heavenly Father, she gives them a dictionary which helps them to learn the language. And they spend their time trying to learn as much as they can about this when all their money runs out. They're not quite sure what to do now. And as they're finally making these preparations to maybe split up, missionaries at this time traveled without purse or scrip, a lady next to them gives them offers to let the missionaries stay in their house, in her house, for free. And again, the hand of the Lord in this experience. What appeared to be a disaster turns into a great blessing as the Lord opens the way for them to stay together and to learn the language.
This is Legacy, and we're talking about the early missionaries to Hawaii, specifically George Q. Cannon and the journals he kept while serving. Historian Chad Orton is our guest. So they just solved a problem with the money, but some other things start to happen. Missionaries start to leave.
And there are a number of missionaries who start to leave. In fact, the mission president comes to them and says, I think it's time we go home, which placed Cannon and his fellow associates in this quandary. What do you do? You're supposed to follow your church leaders, right? But they have felt this inspiration that they need to stay and to learn the language and to preach the gospel to these to the natives. And Cannon says we're relieved of this as the leader said, well, I'm going home. You can do what you feel like. And the great irony about this at this point is that there's been one convert made in the islands, and that was made by the mission president, who then determined that he was going to leave and return to the States. Eventually, 5 of the missionaries during this time leave. Those who stayed with Cannon are my heroes. Cannon had some unique experiences that only he had. He went out and prayed to the Lord. What should he do? He had an experience in the garden where he was told that if he stayed on this mission, he would do a great work, a great service, and that he would be a means of blessing the lives of many. These other missionaries, as far as I can tell, didn't have a similar experience, but either having faith in Cannon or some inspiration, they remained. And they're quite a little eclectic group. Henry Bigler was in his 30s. He was a bachelor. William Farr was in his late 20s. He was a bachelor. James Keeler was a widower, and he had left a young daughter at home when he went to try to earn money for the family. And James Hawken, the last of the missionaries to stay, he was married. And his is kind of a tragic story, as partway through the mission, they get letters from home, and they, as a group, decide to sit around and read their letters from home out loud. And it was during this, as Hawkins is reading his letter, he learns that his wife is tired of waiting for him to return home, and she divorced him, and that was what was told in this letter.
Maybe you can describe some of the living conditions these missionaries were under while they were there. I mean, those of us who have maybe been to Hawaii or see the brochures, we know what it's like today. But
and that was part of the challenge that these missionaries faced. One of the missionaries who came later said, it's not going to heaven in golden slippers to serve a mission in Hawaii. Now we think this would be ideal. These individuals tended to live in grass huts, which is nothing wrong with that, but they tended to share these homes with their animals. The pigs and other animals would live within the house because they had not been taught many of the means of sanitation, which were so familiar in the West. These people would, when they ate, they would all eat out of a common bowl. They would put their fingers in, take the food to their mouth. They would then put their fingers back in. So everybody was eating from this. And
it wasn't just double dipping in those days, evidently.
It was more than double dipping. It's exactly right. And these missionaries are taken back. This is really a hard culture to be in. The roads, it rained quite frequently. They are sloshing through the mud. And when the rain would let up, the heat of the sun would just beat down upon them. It was really quite uncomfortable. One of the things that makes the islands bearable now is you sit on the beach and you let the waves cool you off, or the wind. You go into an air-conditioned place. They experience none of these conditions. To put up with the heat, they frequently would walk at night so that avoid the heat of the day. It was really a difficult mission to be on at this time. You're facing strange foods. When Cannon first eats poi, which is a staple of the Hawaiians, Cannon was a printer. He said it reminded him of book printer's paste. And I don't know if you've eaten poi, but it's an acquired taste, I guess, is a good way to explain it. So you've got a strange food. You don't know the language. Conditions are very, very difficult, but yet their mission is a story of what faith can accomplish under very adverse conditions. They didn't expect any of this, but yet they pushed ahead and put up with what they didn't hope for a better mission. They said, this is what we've got. We need to learn to deal with it and to work with it.
So you mentioned in your notes that there have been some not quite true stories circulating around that maybe we could set straight here today.
Well, one of the great stories involves a fellow named Jonathan Napela, who is Cannon, probably one of Cannon's most prominent Hawaiian converts. And it's frequently told that he was Cannon's first convert. That is simply not true. But he was probably one of the strongest of Cannon's converts. After he had been there for several months under these conditions, trying to learn the language, Cannon felt very impressed that he needed to go out and try to preach the gospel. And he left on a route that took him to a place called Waialuku. And he follows this, and he said, I just felt that as I went there, the Lord had prepared some people for me to meet. And he spent a couple of days on his journey. He still hadn't found someone. And as he walked down a road, there were a couple of women standing out by a gate, and he was hoping that these women would take notice of him and introduce him to the preacher. And he walked by him. He found out he went down the wrong road, and he came back. And this time the women called their husband. Here's a white man, and the individual came out is Jonathan Napela. And they develop a very close friendship. There's a statue at BYU Hawaii of Cannon and Napela. But over time, it takes Napela some time before he joins the church. That's just one of the rumors. But Napela, when Cannon meets Napela, Napela is on the verge of bankruptcy. He had been a rich man. Things had not gone well for him. And he later testifies that as a result of helping the missionaries, that the Lord blessed him financially. And Napela would stand up for the truth. He was a deacon in the Protestant church. He received great pressure from the Protestant minister there not to join Cannon, not to put him up. He received pressure from his wife, Kitty, who there's no evidence ever actually joined the church. But in spite of this, he kept Cannon. He helped other missionaries, and was a blessing to the saints. And it took him a little over a year before he finally joined the church. And if I might tell you two stories about
Please.
Napela that I absolutely love. Napela, in later years, his wife Kitty becomes a leper. She gets Hansen's disease, and she was sent to the leper colony there on Molokai at Kalapapa. It's a sad story, but Kitty had stood through Jonathan Napela through all these years, and Napela goes and spends his last year there at the leper colony with her. While he's there, he contracts leprosy and eventually dies from it. Now, it's a great love story that someone would go to that extent for their spouse, and that's a part of the story I love, is that how he manifests his love for his wife, putting himself in that condition. But one of the stories I think is great with Jonathan Napela is that in 1853 there are new missionaries arrive in the islands, and after having watched Cannon and other missionaries struggle to learn the language, he comes up with this idea that he floats to the missionaries. He tells them, "Come live with me, and I will provide you room. I will fix your meals for you, and that will free you up to do nothing but study the language." And he tells them, "I think in 2 months I can get you fluent enough in the language that you can go out and be further ahead than if you're out there trying to learn it on your own."
The original MTC.
The original MTC. And the funny part is these whites sit there and thinking, what a crazy idea.
Oh.
And they choose not to follow Napela's idea. But yet he has come up with the original MTC more than 100 years before the church implements it. And one more story about Napela that I think is great. He's a great man of faith, and there's a symbiotic relationship between these Mormon missionaries and the natives in the islands. They're holding their first mission conference, and this is before even they pray. It's during the rainy season, and they pray to the Lord that He will hold off the rain during the mission conference. And as the time for the conference approaches, the missionaries say to themselves, "It looks like it's going to rain. We have got to move this indoors." And at that time, as they're looking for a place to move indoors to hold their conference, Napela and some of the native brethren show up, and to which he asked Cannon, "Well, what are you doing?" And he said, "Well, it's going to rain." And Napela says to him, "Well, that doesn't show a lot of faith. You pray to the Lord to hold off the rain, and the moment it looks like it's going to rain, you decide to move indoors." And Cannon writes in his journal about how he's rightfully rebuked in this. And at that point, that there's no way that they could move indoors. And so they hold the meeting outdoors, and sure enough, it doesn't rain throughout the meeting, and after the meeting, it starts to rain. And so early on, Cannon learned this lesson of faith from the natives that blessed his life and others. As a follow-up, years later, near the end of his mission, Cannon and Napela are on a boat traveling between Lanai and Maui, and there's a problem. And Cannon becomes quite sick. He was tend to be seasick all the time, and whenever he got on the ocean, and he finally turns to Napela and says, "You've got the faith. Will you control the elements?" And Cannon reports, as do other missionaries, that Napela offered this prayer of faith, and the elements turned in the missionaries' favor.
Wow. This is Legacy on the Mormon Channel of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We're talking about the early missionaries to Hawaii, specifically George Q. Cannon and the journals he kept while serving. Historian Chad Orton is our guest. It's my understanding that George Q. Cannon translated the Book of Mormon into Hawaiian. What other things did he accomplish while he was there?
He did translate the Book of Mormon into Hawaiian, and it was important at that time because the Hawaiians did not have any scriptures, latter-day works, that they could rely upon, that they could develop their own faith. So Cannon spent a good portion of his mission trying to translate the Book of Mormon into Hawaiian. And he thought it was important that they had it because he notes that during the early days of his mission, when he felt friendless, he turned to the Book of Mormon and found courage and hope in the words that were written there. And he also felt it was important. Cannon was among those who believed that the Hawaiians are descendants of those talked about in the Book of Mormon through Hagoth, they're at least descendant of Israel, and that they needed to know this record of their ancestors. So he spent a good deal of time trying to translate this and get the ideas correctly. It took him a couple of years because he spent all his time also doing full-time missionary service on top of this. But eventually, after he completed his mission, he published the Book of Mormon, as well as other works in the for the Hawaiians. And he had a great love of the Book of Mormon through this experience that would carry him throughout his life. One of the things you talk about, what did they do, is they started baptizing these Hawaiians. And at that time, it was an era of gathering. The individuals would come to Utah, and it made some sense that you bring someone from England or from Germany. They had some ties to the Western culture. And these missionaries early on had this concern. What do we do with the Hawaiians? Are we supposed to gather them? How will they deal with this cold climate? They don't wear as many clothes as we do. How will they deal with strange foods? There were a lot of concerns that I think go beyond just your pure prejudice. There were concerns, legitimate concerns. And they had this experience where they talked about and debated, what do we do with these Hawaiians? And an individual, one of the missionaries named John Woodbury, stood up and made by the inspiration of the Spirit, he talked about that he felt that Hawaii was the place for Hawaiians, that was where they were to gather. And if they stayed there, that they would be blessed. The missionaries had been sent in response to the prayers of those on the other side, their ancestors. But he said something that was really quite interesting. This is in 1852. He prophesied that there would be temples, plural, in the islands to bless the native Hawaiians. And what's fascinating about that story is that up to that time, the church had built 2 temples. They had built one in Kirtland. They had built one in Nauvoo. And it would still be 6 months before they broke ground for the Salt Lake Temple. But here, this missionary in Hawaii is prophesying that they would have multiple temples in Hawaii. And we now have 2 temples in the island, the one at Laie, and there's also one on the island of Kona. And this has become the setting for the church plantation establishment at Laie, is this understanding that individuals are to gather where, much like we have now, where they are baptized. That is the gathering spot for these individuals. There are some things in the in Canon's mission that show the hand of the Lord in so many ways. There are individuals who have dreams, that they see Canon in dreams, or they see other individuals. One of them, why he translated the Book of Mormon, is that someone had a dream where they saw Canon walking towards them holding a book of Scripture, the Book of Mormon, and they were supposed to read that. There's a period of time on the mission where Canon records a number of miraculous Day of Pentecostal type healings, and that's one of the fun things to read in Canon's journal. One of my favorite entries is he talks about and says, "Oh, I just learned that the individual who I blessed last week to get his sight back can now see." And he never recorded that he had blessed this individual. But yet you're seeing these missionaries do some incredible things through faith. There's a story given of a woman who dies in childbirth that other missionaries bring back to life. There are some great miracles taking place. And one of the things I love about Canon at this time is I watch he and these other missionaries accomplish this, is that they are really nobodies in the church. The 12 baptize about the same number in England, but they are the 12. And here these guys are new young missionaries. And when Canon starts I was going to tell this story earlier, in the first meeting that they preach, Henry Bigler gives the sermon, and Bigler reports that he has to speak because Canon doesn't want to. The others don't want to. They say, "Bigler, you're the oldest one. You preach." and Canon is afraid of public speaking. And one of the stories I love is you watch this man grow before your very eyes. He talks about having to, when he gives his first sermon in Hawaiian, that he practices it. He tries to memorize it. And he gives this in his hut. He gives his speech so he knows what to say, and he talks about that how he got into this where he was going to give his sermon, how he startled at his own voice because the acoustics are different in this where he's speaking, and he's paused, taken back for a moment. He writes in his journal before that meeting that no prisoner under sentence of death feared the approach of the hour more than he did to try to give a talk in Hawaiian. And I think all of us can kind of relate to that. Along this line, he writes to his fellow missionaries, and he talks about how nervous he was. And I think there's a line in his letter that says, my bowels decidedly went downward. Something that I think we can all relate to. But as he kept doing this over the course of his mission, he was able to preach powerful sermons at the drop of a hat. And we know these sermons because they're recorded. You see him develop before your eyes. That's one of the things that I love about the George Buchanan and Hawaii story.
So you mentioned some of the living conditions that the missionaries had to endure, which was just everyday life for the Hawaiians. Did they try to make a difference in that
They
area
did
as well?
Hawaii in the 1850s was experiencing a great downturn in population because of the introduction of white men's diseases, smallpox and others. And by the end of their mission, Cannon and other missionaries are concerned that the living style of the Hawaiians, they might be contributing to this decline in population. Not only that, if they were ever going to live among the whites, that they would have to learn to different modes of living. So they started preaching what we would call, I guess, a social gospel that for a number of years we had welfare missionaries go out and do. They talked about the needs for these Hawaiians to start sleeping in beds rather than on the floor, to start using utensils. Don't eat out of a common pot. Wash your hands before eating, and things like this that now we understand, but at the time were not fully understood among individuals. And in some way, they're way ahead of their time, because some of the diseases in that we know would not be identified until years later. One of the conditions you had asked earlier is that these guys are having to eat some things that were brand new to them. Dog, mule meat, things that they normally wouldn't be used to, but these individuals had to experience firsthand. And Cannon tells the story of a joke that these Hawaiians played, in that they, knowing how much the whites had this adversity to eating dog, they took the head of the pig, suckling pig, and put it on the dog, and the head of the dog and put it on the pig, and watched with amusement as these whites ate this, what they thought was a pig with relish. They were really enjoying this to a great extent.
So the time finally came for them to go home. How did that all transpire?
When Cannon finally left Hawaii, it was a sad time. They were sad to leave the Saints, but for a number of years they had traveled the islands without purse or scrip, and they had no money. And how were they supposed to book passage? I mean, they had asked the Saints, and these individuals would give their might, but it was still not enough in their mind's eye. And when they went to book passage, they were short of the money that they would need the next day to leave on the boat. And once again, the way is miraculously opened up that they could get the money to pay for their passage. And the passage home was not without its trials. They got passage on the first steamship to travel from Hawaii to San Francisco, and they ran out of coal, so it took them a few more days to get home than they anticipated. And one of the things that I love about Cannon is that he's somewhat a typical missionary, in that he left a girl behind, and she's a very patient girl. She waited 5 years for him. And he had to learn a foreign language. There's some things that are fairly typical that we could relate to today. But one of the recounts is that the night before he's to meet his girlfriend, he couldn't sleep with anticipation of having been gone for 5 years. And what is that going to, what that experience is going to be like? But as he left the islands, he was I mean, it was tearful. These people, they had been through so much together. They had experienced. These missionaries would go, these Hawaiians would accompany the missionaries and help them then all that they needed to do. He had learned so much from them. There's one story, and I didn't mention it earlier, where Canon needs to get a horse to travel, and this horse won't be caught. He chases him around, and he can't catch the horse. And finally, and this is told by another individual, Canon kneels down and prays to the Lord that I need this horse, and help me to catch this horse. And he gets up from his knees after spending a great deal of time chasing this animal, walks over and is able to put a bridle and a saddle on and to continue on his journey. One of the other things I popped into my mind is that one of the things that I admire about Canon as a missionary is he writes some very incredible things in his journal. But some of the things that he doesn't write, I think, are as equally impressive, or things that we can learn about today. That there are frequently missionaries telling stories of Canon's good deeds towards them that Canon doesn't bother to record himself. He writes about the goodness of the Lord towards him, but when he's actually the means of blessing other people, he doesn't let the right hand know what the left hand is doing, as the scriptures talk about.
It seems to me from that dream he had while on the ship, the one thing that I can take away from George Hugh Cannon is the power of prayer. He seemed to really have faith in that act. He
had faith in prayer. He did. And his mission is an example of what faith and prayer combined together can accomplish. The timing for the mission couldn't have been worse. Things did not go as he had anticipated, but yet by having faith in the Lord and praying to Him to be guided, to open the way for him, things opened up to a remarkable degree, not only for him, but for all those around him. And that's exactly right. Those are the great lessons that I think that can be drawn out of this story.
Well, this has been a very enjoyable and, I have to say, eye-opening discussion, not knowing most of the information we talked about today. Chad Orden, thank you for your research, insight, and the time spent with us here. Look forward to the next time you can come.
Well, thanks. It's good to be with you.
I'm Nathan Wright, and you're listening to the Mormon Channel of The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We invite you to listen to new episodes of Legacy Saturdays at 1 o'clock. You can also download any Legacy episode at mormonchannel.org.